Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to our weekly ship show. My name is Jason Brand. I am the Director of Outreach and Partner Development here at Supply Chain Solutions. So we've got our freight market roundup for this week. And hang on, I got to quick take a drink of water here. So let's quick start us all off. If you have not joined us before, our goal here is a 15-minute blast of information that's going to cover rates, key takeaways, and it all comes from what our internal teams are kind of talking about, what they're worried about, what we're hearing from our clients, what they're concerned about. And it's kind of a really fun way to disperse information about what's going on in our realm and in our clients' realm. So make sure you join us every week. We're on live at 1 p.m. Eastern. Every other week, we do this series, which is the Freight Market Roundup, which is where we do this general blast. The weeks between, we cover different topics. For example, next week, we've got a great guest on the show. I cannot wait to interview her with all of you. So get excited for that one. But if it's your first time here, a little bit of housekeeping. We don't have any visuals. So if this is your first time tuning in, we do like to keep a format. And what we're going to do is we're going to run through the major ocean shipping lanes first. And then we're going to discuss some of the major events affecting the ocean market right now. And we're going to do that before going into the air freight market and doing the same thing, talking about events as well. So let's just dive right in. Now, another little bit of information. All of the rates we're using are rates that we or our partners ourselves are shipping on. So you're going to see occasionally they'll be slightly higher. Sometimes they'll be slightly lower, but they generally tend to be in line with the market because it's just the way our business works. You sort of have to be in line or you sink. But what we are talking about right now, as a reminder, again, it's the ocean shipping market, and we are just focused on the ocean portion itself. So we're not talking about inland charges, just that ocean portion. So pull out your invoices, check it out, just to make sure what you're paying right now is in line with where the market's at. So if you're a customer of ours and you were shipping on that Trans-Pacific lane last week, which is a reminder that Southeast Asia and China coming into specifically the US West Coast, you likely noticed a pretty sharp increase in prices. And it's been happening right now, but just over the past couple of weeks, it's been getting a little bit worse. So the average shipment cost last week was up to $5,900 per 40-foot container. That's nearly 47% higher than it was last month, which is just crazy. Now, one of the things, though, that's kind of cool is the schedule reliability on this lane. It's actually been increasing pretty steadily over the past 6 months now, but we're up a whopping 10.32 percentage points. And, if we kind of break that down based on who's the best and who's the worst, really from our experience, Evergreen has been the most reliable carrier out of all of our shipments, and actually out of all of our partner shipments coming through this lane. We saw a reliability score of around 80%. Now, on the flip side, we had Maersk, and Maersk was the least reliable of the carriers we were using, and they were sitting at a reliability, and this is particular to this lane, at 36%. So definitely some big differences based on who you're shipping with. Now, before we go over to our transatlantic, we've been talking about this. If you've been with us week over week, we've been bringing this lane up because it has been really hot recently, for a couple of reasons, but the cost going up pretty aggressively is something we want to stay focused on. And that is our Southeast Asia and China headed into the Mexican West Coast. Now, last week, we broke down some of the economics behind this nearshoring boom that's been happening in Mexico and some of the consequences, which has included this 280% increase in ocean shipping costs, literally just over the past 75 days. Now, I can't even believe it, but that crazy increase has continued these past 2 weeks. So now if you are shipping on this lane, if you're one of our customers, you likely paid around $6,500 per 40-foot container. And that is up from just 2 weeks before. It was $5,600. So it's rising, and it's rising fast. Now let's move over to the transatlantic lane, specifically the shipments that are leaving European ports and headed into the US East Coast. So our customers last week paid an average of right around $1,900 per 40-foot container crossing the Atlantic. We've talked about this recently. There's some reasons behind this, but what we have noticed is a very consistent and a very slow degradation of rates on this lane. It's been like $50 to $100 a week, and it's just been happening for months now. And there are some reasons behind it. We'll get in there in a little bit, but I do want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about something kind of general, because the team has been working with some of our clients, and we're hearing some things, and I just want to kind of communicate it real quick. So, and in general, on our freight market roundups, we, FMR for short, we don't generally talk about specific topics in a lot of depth. And the reason why is it's our goal to kind of do a quick shotgun approach, blanket, hey, here's what's going on in these lanes. Here's some of the events we're talking about, and boom. But we are witnessing some pretty extreme pressures on certain lanes. That China, Southeast Asia to Mexico lane is a great example. And some of these lanes that are having these extreme pressures are affecting ocean rates and carrier performance all across the globe. So our teams have had to talk about congestion and schedule reliability. And that's been with some customers recently. And that's kind of a tough topic because, what we just experienced out of the pandemic was those same words coming up, but meaning something very different. So the main thing, obviously, I think many people are asking is how could we be having congestion right now? And quite frankly, it is a little bit complicated to break down. So in the fullest form. So I'm going to kind of try to take a quick stab at it, run through some of the factors that, cause this like congestion experience. And make sure you kind of take this information back to your teams and understand kind of what's going on right now. So if we were going to break down some of the main reasons that congestion is caused on a global level, you've got a few things that stand out. So first of all, larger than normal surges in demand. You've got any major labor issues on a major shipping lane. You've got extreme weather systems. You've got situations with equipment when there's large equipment shortages. You have insufficient port storage. So if the warehouses near the ports are all completely full, that really slows things down as well. And then I think there's the most obvious one when you think of congestion or you think of disruption, and that is any major disruptions on major shipping lanes. So if you think about all of those I ran through, and these are just kind of the facts of how it is, we're actually dealing with something in each one of those categories right at this moment. And a lot of them are pretty extreme, and they've been going on, some of them, for a while. And now while the economy hasn't really come back equally across the board, there are some markets that are clearly doing very well right now. And that's being seen in, in certain industries, shipping volumes just being much higher than usual. So let's start off with surges in demand. Currently, we're dealing with an insane surge of exports out of China, and they're headed to mainly two locations, or at least their end destination is mainly two locations. That is, either North American, not only the US, but the North American West Coast, but even more so going into numerous ports in Europe. And this demand surge between Europe and China, it's completely overwhelmed Singapore, as well as other transshipment points along the way, such as Malaysia. And as a result, you're seeing a huge slowdown in turnaround times in these areas. And that in turn is dramatically lengthening transit times on these lanes. So, you think about this China to Europe lane, and on top of that, we still have the Red Sea crisis going on, which is and it's also being, exacerbated by these continued attacks from Houthi rebels. And that's forcing the shipping lane to go completely avoid the obvious route and go all the way around Africa to get to their intended European end destinations. So when you've got these transit times on major shipping lanes and they're taking way longer than normal, what you have is, you think about capacity on like a global scale, and more of that global capacity, it's soaked up with full boats sitting on the water for longer than they should be. That strains carriers' abilities to reposition capacity across the board. And then ultimately it takes the other lanes that are hot at the moment and it stresses them out, and that kind of trickles down. So, you need those other hot lanes to have strong capacity levers to be able to be used, implemented, or taken out to operate effectively and not create, just these pocket issues. Now, the Asia to North American West Coast market in particular, and the lanes headed into, if we think about it, specifically headed into Monterrey in Mexico or headed into the Southern Californian ports, they are dealing with these warehouses that are completely full. And this is from the surge of Asian imports. Now, on top of that, you've got the US East Coast, and currently they're going through a port contract negotiation, and it's causing a much larger proportion of shippers who normally ship into the East Coast. Now we've got a larger proportion shipping into the West Coast, which is putting more pressure on those ports in general. And that's further, obviously, that's straining the ports. Obviously, it's straining the warehouses, but it's also straining the equipment availability. So even though you might be in a lane that's more stable from a cost fluctuation and a schedule reliability standpoint, if you've got these big changes happening in the macro environment, especially if they're happening over a long period of time, it forces these carriers to react. And generally, when they react and how they react is they'll prioritize the busiest shipping lanes, and they'll specifically prioritize the shipping lanes that are the highest margins. Ultimately, that's going to trickle down to problems across the board. And unfortunately, we're in a situation like this, quite frankly, right now. And I didn't even touch on how these major changes in shipping patterns affect empty container logistics. And that's a whole nother bag of worms. Honestly, running through this series during the pandemic was fascinating because everyone was taking a look at a new area, which normally didn't get a lot of attention. And we had the chance to kind of unpack things that are less talked about and less thought about. And gave it a really interesting interesting experience for logistics professionals across the board. But anyway, let's move on. I've got to talk about a couple things going on, and I'm really going to try to kind of pair what we're talking about today to that, what's going on with this congestion-like environment. So let's talk about the East Coast ports, because we just talked about that. And I've actually got a pretty big update for you. So the International Longshoremen's Association, or the ILA, they canceled negotiations with the United States Maritime Alliance, and this is for their new 6-year contract. And it is due to alleged violations by Maersk and its APM terminal subsidiary. ILA is claiming that they're using this auto gate system, and they're also claiming, and this is specifically in the port of Mobile, but it's processing trucks without ILA labor, essentially, and that is constituting, in their eyes, a breach of their contract. So the issue, the union also believes, is occurring at other ports, and it's led to the ILA to halt talks until this matter is completely resolved. So as a reminder, the ILA, they're a union. They are representing more than 45,000 dock workers along the U.S. East and Gulf Coast ports. And they've consistently expressed a strong opposition to automation projects that reduce longshoremen jobs. This is not new. These longshoremen jobs, if we go back to the ILWU, automation has been obviously, front and center, because it's viewed as taking away union jobs. And these ports also are in this kind of battle between trying to automate and then also trying to maintain their union relations and their contracts. So, this is a great example of, an issue that is going to get hotter with the times, and it's really heating up. Now, Maersk, in response to this, they've maintained that their technology initiatives do not violate the master contract. And, they obviously said, we're eager to resume negotiations. The ILA's president, his name is Harold J. Daggett. He pointed to a couple other automation projects, specifically one at Pier 400 in Los Angeles, and also another project in the Port of Virginia. And he said these are great examples of technology that has reduced longshoremen employment. And he's also emphasized that these efforts by Maersk and APM terminals are undermining their current agreements. Now, to be fair, and to throw everything out there, the ILA is currently they are experiencing an increase in IT personnel at these marine terminals. And they also are currently doing an audit to understand the broader impact on the amount of labor at the ports associated with automation. So, as soon as that audit is complete, I think they're going to come out guns swinging, or we'll figure out obviously what that audit reveals. But they are threatening a strike if the new coastwide agreement is not in place by September 30, which is the expiration of the current deal. And, there was a couple different deadlines they put out there. There was a May 17th deadline that was thrown out there. And that was when the ILA leadership said, okay, we want local talks to start first. They need to be wrapped up by May 17th, and we'll kind of work our way bottom to top. And that's where this Port of Mobile situation started. And the most recent news is it's really going to be a monkey wrench in the gears. So we've got to keep our eyes on this. It's pretty clear this is going to be a pretty big point of contention. Now, another issue here is there's a couple other things that APM has been doing that have been said have violated the terms of the agreement. So the terminals had a couple recent projects at Mobile. They installed cameras and new traffic systems for yard tractors, and they did not follow in their previous contract the agreed upon procedure of notifying labor. and it is further throwing complications in. Maersk is really shown a lot of interest in advancing automation within their container shipping supply chain. They've made very clear investments in autonomous yard tractor companies and also pilot projects for autonomous trucking. So this is definitely going to be heated. Now, also, just to kind of show comparison, and I've mentioned this before, the ILWU, which was the West Coast labor union, they didn't wrap up their contract talks until around 9 months after the expiration of their contract. And, there was obviously a lot of situations that occurred, but the ILA has not been on strike in quite some time. And they started these negotiations saying they would strike if a contract is not reached by expiration. And so if history has any lesson to teach us about the most recent contract negotiation that was dealing with, similar times issues, it's going to be tough to hit this contract expiration, with a contract that is agreed upon by both sides. But we'll see. We really have to follow this week over week. Now, let's quick switch gears. We got to dive deeper into what we were talking about earlier. And I want to talk about some of the collateral damage that's occurring with this huge surge of Asian exports and, what it's done to the market. So let's look at ocean freight rates, and let's look specifically at the freight rates coming out of China going into India. So they have surged dramatically during this time period. And it is, quite frankly, due to congestion at these transshipment points that we mentioned earlier. It's just completely affected vessel schedules and space availability. So the spot market from Shanghai to Nhava Sheva or Mundra, which is in West India, they have skyrocketed. Right now, it's around $4,250 per 40-foot container, and it's up from $1,180 in late May. Similarly, rates from Singapore and Malaysia's Port Klang to West India, they have risen to $4,500 per FEU, 40-foot equivalent unit, with the Japan to India routes also having these significant increases as well. So Indian industrial importers, they are heavily dependent on China for these input products, and they definitely are struggling with this limited space availability despite paying extremely high freight rates. This has led to obvious supply chain disruptions, and it is forcing the investors to kind of change their strategy to a build-up inventory strategy to prevent stockouts. This is causing issues, but the recent solution has been further consolidating in Southeast Asia and India beforehand. Now, recently, the situation is really only getting worse. Carriers have actually shifted capacity away from this area because they are prioritizing right now the North American market. And that is simply because, as we're seeing with the Southeast Asia and China headed into Monterey lane, the rates are skyrocketing. They're insanely high at the moment, and carriers are trying to get a piece of that action. So ultimately, they're pulling capacity out of this area that is just in dire need of capacity, and it's taking the issues in Singapore and these transshipment points, and it's making them even worse. So that is just some of the current things that we're talking about, we're focused on, and it is a challenge at this moment. So just understand we're having a little bit of a market challenge, and some of these major disruptions when they clear up. The Red Sea, as soon as we can find a resolve there, that will definitely help a substantial amount. Now, there is a lot going on that we have not covered. I wanted to kind of focus on a few of these things and just keep our show on the road. So let's dive into the air freight market, and let's take this freight market roundup home. So air freight. Right now, if you're shipping from Southeast Asia and China, and you're headed into the U.S., we are seeing our customers paying an average of $6.76 a kilo. And if you look at the low cost across all destinations from all origins, we're seeing a $6.36 per kilo price. And then between all origins and all destinations, we're seeing a high of $7.29 per kilo. So obviously, the air freight market is still elevated. We did discuss what's happening with Temu and Shein and how they are just sucking up carrier capacity, and it's really kept this pretty elevated. Now we have the situation in the ocean market. Right now, schedule reliability is not an issue, but if it does become an issue, we'll see more pressure on this air freight market, which you can even see these prices go higher. Really, they have maintained such a high price point so far this year. It's been pretty remarkable. Anyway, everybody, we are over time, but I really appreciate you guys joining us today. Make it a great week, and make sure you tune in next week at Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. Thanks so much. Bye.